The beauty company Benefit takes on a Down syndrome model. While this sounds like a warm and fuzzy story, it's not. It's actually really sick and twisted. I'll tell you why. Also, in honor of Mother's Day, I'm going to tell you a little bit about mine and one of the greatest things she ever did for me, which was escaping polygamy. Then we're going to talk about the importance of the fifth commandment and why this matters to our country so much more than you would guess at surface level. My name is Elisa Steele. You're watching Deconstructing the Culture. Happy Monday, conservative babes. I hope you celebrated your mama yesterday because while Mother's Day is technically a made-up holiday, I think it's a really important made-up holiday. So if you have that kind of relationship with your mom, or if your mom's around, then I hope you did something to celebrate and honor her. Now let's jump right into the news. Benefit, the beauty brand cosmetic, they just brought on a new model. And she signed, well, actually, I should say a new ambassador is what they call her. But the girl's name is Kate Grant. She's 20 years old and she comes from Northern Ireland. And she's a model who has Down syndrome. Now, this sounds warm and fuzzy, I know, because I personally think it's wonderful to celebrate Down syndrome people and that it's really, really, really devastating that our world doesn't celebrate them as much as they should. They're human beings, just like you or I, with an extra chromosome. That makes them extra special. But this girl who was just signed on, the reason why I think this is a really awful story, I'm going to get to that in just a second, but just a little bit about it and how she got to this place. She was chosen as the brand's beauty ambassador because she shared a photo on her Instagram profile and she tagged Benefit Cosmetics, and she got a huge, impressive feedback on Benefit's Instagram page because of this. So, according to Grant, this Down syndrome girl, being a beauty ambassador will help her spread awareness about the important inclusion for people with disabilities like her and will help them not being defined by their disability. This is only the beginning of Grant's modeling career, and with such a strong attitude, we are sure we'll hear more about her in the future. Now, this is where it gets twisted. I don't know if you were checking the news a few weeks ago or in March, so quite a few weeks ago, but it's not really new news anymore, and maybe it's faded in people's minds. The part of this that comes into play that makes this really sick for Benefit to have her be an ambassador for their program. The reason why is, it's so sad, but Benefit, they help fund money to an organization that kills people like Grant, people who have extra chromosomes, people who, for whatever reason, some parents don't want, and they kill them in the womb. Yes, you've got it. Benefit funds Planned Parenthood. So this is a portion from an article from Allure. And it says, on March 12th, Benefit Cosmetics and MAC Cosmetics announced partnerships to support Planned Parenthood in a, quote, welcome coincidence, as a MAC spokesman clarified, an incredible step forward for both brands, an ongoing mission of philanthropy and giving back to undeserved and marginalized communities. MAC is continuing to support Planned Parenthood, and Benefit just announced that. So did you guys catch that right there from the spokesman? It's giving back to undeserved and marginalized communities? What? Oh, underserved. I'm sorry, I said undeserved. I was like, that doesn't make sense. It's underserved and marginalized communities. Well, Down syndrome falls in that category, but you're giving back in a really horrible way. If giving back means killing them in the womb in most countries, this is a thing. Here in America, 60% of Down syndrome babies are killed in the womb when they're diagnosed. This is horrible. This is not giving back. If this is your idea of giving back, I never, ever want to be on the receiving end of you giving back. It's like me saying, you know what? My neighbor, they're so kind to me. They're constantly letting me borrow things and bringing me cookies. I'm going to give back to them. And while they're on vacation, I'm going to rob their entire house, take all their favorite things and everything I like. I mean, I just want to give back to them. No, that's not giving back. That's horrible. And it's quite frankly, that analogy doesn't even compare with giving back to this community. Your rendition is killing them. Something doesn't seem right in this picture. So that's why it's sick and twisted for them to pat themselves on the back, thinking their band's so great. Oh my goodness, they're just being so inclusive. Oh my goodness, they're being so supportive of the Down syndrome community. If you're being so supportive, then why are you giving money to organizations that belligerently and blatantly kill these babies in the womb? That's not giving back. But if you want to know how you can give back, then there are many, many, many pro-life women's clinic and organizations that do give back and help moms support the babies that maybe they couldn't feel like they knew how to support or take care of. And you know what? There are beautiful resources out there for you to actually give to that will give back. So that's the hypocrisy on that. Now, getting to the real subject matter of today, it's the day after Mother's Day, and I'm feeling inspired because I love my mama 365 days of the year, but Mother's Day is the day when I can express to her just how much she means to me. Now, unfortunately, I live halfway across the country from her right now. She lives in the West, and I live in Florida. So I show it the best way I can, but I'm telling you, moms are really important. And I say this as someone who I don't always have a completely smooth relationship with my mother. Let's be honest. We're both human beings. We're both women. We're really only 18 years apart, so we're relatively close in age. And we have our bumps in the road, and sometimes we disagree strongly. We get in our disagreements, and we usually forget about them about an hour later, and we're best friends again. But our relationship isn't perfect, and I'm not going to try and sugarcoat it. But at the end of the day, I want you to remember that no matter what your relationship is like with your mother, you should always, always honor her. And I'm going to get to that in just a second. In the meantime, I want to tell you a little bit about my mom. So I think I've mentioned her on the podcast a few times here and there, and I know I have done tributes to her on Instagram. So if you want to go check out those posts I've written about this, here's the detailed story, or as detailed as I'm going to get today. But here's the story for the first time I've talked about it really on the podcast. So when my mom was 21, so you're talking younger than I am right now, she escaped polygamy. And it was not easy. This is not something that she was temporarily in a cult for a few years and then she got out of it. No, she was raised in this. My grandfather was a polygamist. He had, I actually don't know how many wives, probably between 7 or 8 or 9 wives, somewhere in that realm. My grandfather, so my mom's dad, was a polygamist, and he had 42 children. And my mom was one of those 42 children. From her mother, just her mother, she was one of 14 children. So she had 13 other siblings. She was number 10 in that line. So we're talking about a history of being in a cult and being in polygamy, because it goes back further than that on my mother's mom's side. So my mother's mom came from polygamy. She married my grandfather when she was 16 years old and became his second wife. And before that, there are, on my father's side, few lines of polygamy down on the LeBaron side. So let's just say from both my father and my mother, there are deep roots in polygamy. And so it was not an easy thing for my mom to do this. She had many people telling her she was doing the wrong thing. She was leaving her husband, which was a sin, and that also on top of that, in Mexican law, to my knowledge, all authority over children lies with the father, and mothers, if they leave, then they have to leave their children, which is what keeps a lot of women in polygamy in Mexico. So she ran away at 21, and when I say ran away, she truly had to escape that situation. She left her life in Mexico. She was living, I was born in Mexico. She lived in Mexico for a while. She also lived in the States. For clarification, there's a few of you who've been like, oh, your mom's Mexican. No, it's actually my father who's Mexican. My mother was born and raised in the United States, born in Colorado. So my mom's an American citizen, but she was living off and on in Mexico when she was young. So my father was Um, a human being, a very flawed human being, I should say is. He is a flawed human being like all of us. And I think polygamy is really sad on everyone, especially the women, but even for the men. And so while I won't make excuses for him and his behavior, he struggled with alcoholism and was abusive to my mother. And so she was abused by him, and she just realized this wasn't right. This is not what God has called her to do. She was just like, I don't believe that this is the true religion. This can't be the case. I don't believe that God would want people to suffer this much. This just doesn't seem right. So she left all that. She left her other sister wives. I think she was wife number 5 out of a total of like 7 or 8. It's a little fuzzy for me on those, especially for at that time, but I know she was wife number 5. And she left a kind of a crazy cult religion. She was told by a lot of people, including close family members, that she was going to go to hell for leaving polygamy, and it was not the right thing to do, because in the fundamental religion that I come from, in order to get like to the highest level of heaven, you have to live a polygamous lifestyle. So she left that and decided to become, to embrace the life of being a single mom in the United States. And this was incredibly difficult. She literally had to crawl out of a basement window after my biological father threatened to hurt her again. And she did this with literally 2 babies, me and my younger brother. I was 2 years old at the time, so he was very, very little. And she did this out of a basement window with 2 duffel bags and got out. And I love her for this, because even though this was unbelievably hard for her, and every day was an uphill battle for her for many years, and she struggled with so much, she did this because not only did she want a better future for her, but she wanted a better future for me. She knew that I wasn't going to get the best that life could offer me in this situation. She wanted to offer me more than what she had growing up in this religion. And I love her for it. It's a legacy of sacrifice, self-sacrifice, and a legacy of giving to something greater, giving to the next generation. And so it goes past the fact that my mother, didn't abort me, that she kept me even in a difficult situation. That goes past that. It goes to the portion where she could have just left her kids, but she didn't, because she wanted to take her babies and give them a better life. And I have benefited from that greatly. So the next few years were incredibly difficult. When my mom left, she literally had no car, no job, no plan, basically no money. And she just knew she had to get out, and that's what she did. And because of that, she's one of the bravest women that I have ever known. And I know you can read great stories about women, and you can hear great stories about women, but personal acquaintance of mine, or more than an acquaintance, I love this woman. I think she is so incredibly strong. And so that is a huge reason why I like to honor her on Mother's Day. So one memory in particular inspires me, and this comes back to actually Conservative Babes. A lot of people have asked me, like, what's the inspiration behind Conservative Babes? And I really have to say it's my mom. It really is my mom. The reason why is one of the earliest memories I have is being a little girl sitting in a stroller with my little brother as my mom went endlessly door to door selling plates of cookies, little plates of cookies, like this big, little plates, and like saran wrap covering it, colored saran wrap covering it. And she would go door to door, us in the stroller, and it was miserable for us. And it's just selling these cookies, and I don't even know how much, maybe a few dollars for each plate. And when people would ask her, like, because people go to doors selling Girl Scout cookies and other things, and people would ask her, are you selling this for a cause? What's the cause behind this? And she would just say, I'm a single mom, I refuse to go on welfare, and I'm selling cookies to feed my kids and keep a roof over our head. And that's just the kind of woman she was. She didn't want a handout. She wanted a hand up. She wanted to be able to work, to take care of us. She didn't want to sit around waiting for life to kick her in the butt. She did everything she could to support her babies. And from there, she took night classes and worked really hard to get into real estate. And eventually, she is the person who inspired and became the original conservative babes and the original conservative babe. And so that's the story, really, really like the deeper underlying story behind why I started the Conservative Babes page and tribe. And I'm so happy that you're part of it. And I just want you to know the inspiration behind it, because it inspires me. I hope it inspires you. And I hope that sometime soon I'll actually maybe bring my mom on the podcast so she can tell her own stories. So for sure, comment on Instagram or wherever you're watching on YouTube or iTunes, and let me know if you want me to bring her on. All right, now let's do some Bible talk. Let's talk the fifth commandment. The fifth commandment is found in Exodus 20:12, and it says, "Honor your father and your mother so that you may live long in the land the Lord your God has given you." Now, a lot of people read this and they think, oh, that's going to be like a reward if I follow that commandment. No, it's a reasoning behind it. And this is interesting. I was reading Dennis Prager's take on this recently in the Exodus Rational Bible. And Dennis talks about how this is one of the only commandments in the Bible where God gives you a reasoning behind the commandment. So for instance, when he says, thou shalt not commit adultery, he doesn't tell you why. He just says, don't commit adultery, and then calls it good. This one, he says, honor your parents, and let me tell you why. And the reason is our country, the land that you're in, it will prosper and continue for a long time to come. This is really, really important. I believe it really applies to the breakdown of America too, is the breakdown of the family, the breakdown of not showing honor to your family, showing honor to your parents specifically. Now, Dennis goes on to talk about in his book that parents shouldn't be stressing teaching, or the Bible doesn't stress teaching children to love their parents or to be friends with them or to like them. God tells you to love your neighbor, and he tells you to love God. He doesn't necessarily say you have to love your parents, because let's get real, some parents are kind of unlovable. Maybe they're not good human beings who are healthy to be around for either you or your children. Maybe you're like me and you weren't really raised around your father. You know, my father, God bless him, I'm sure he has his good parts and his bad parts just like any human being, but I wasn't raised around him for obvious reasons. But while I'm not around him, my father, for all intents and purposes, and the man who raised me is my stepfather, but I just call him my real dad because that's the role he played in my life, and I'm honoring to him because he has stepped in and filled that role and been a father to me, so I honor him as my parent. But then even with that said, I'm talking hypothetical here, and I didn't actually think I was going to talk about this, but if someday I meet my biological father again, I'm not going to cuss him out or say something bad to him, because regardless of the fact that I don't have a relationship with him and my mother doesn't have a lot of fond feelings towards him, to be honest, he is the other part of my DNA. So if I found him to be toxic, I'd stay away from him, because parents should be treated differently. They should be treated with respect and honor to the best of your ability, depending on the situation. Another thing is, we know that, and Prager makes the point that our parents and our relationship with our parents is one of the main ways that we learn about having a moral authority over us to whom we're accountable to. We learn that first with our parents, hopefully, and then from there, we incorporate that into God being the ultimate moral authority over us later. And he says that without this, we can't create or maintain a moral society, and I would tend to agree. Prager also makes a critical point that honoring one's parents is the best antidote to totalitarianism. One of the first things a totalitarianism government will do is try to break the child-parent bond. In fact, Hitler is quoted to have said, "He alone who owns the youth gains the future." He also wrote, "Universal education is the most coordinating and disintegrating poison that liberalism has ever invented for its own destruction." And that's why I'm not going to bash the public school system, and I'm not going to bash any of your choices for how you decide to do school with your children, but I believe that there is definitely some disadvantages to children going to school younger and younger and spending less and less time with their family, less and less time with their mother and father, building that bond and learning honor and respect and the life principles you need to learn from your parents, and more time with the state and the school system. And I'll leave it right there. At the end of the day, honoring our parents helps to keep our country strong, with a stronger moral fiber and society, and it also helps, as God says, to keep the land long in the days that He's given us. So before I continue on, I would ask that you please subscribe, leave a review, share with a friend, because that is mainly how this tribe has grown, even to the extent that it has, is word of mouth. It's called me and you, Chiquitita, having this conversation, and then you share it with a friend and say, hey, I really like this piece of here, listen to this. So thank you so much for those of you who have been continually doing that. Thank you for those of you who will do that today to share this Mother's Day message and anything else that entertains you in it, honestly. All right. So now into books. I am doing this because this is Mother's Day themed. I want to tell you about actually a children's book that I grew up and my mother read to us. Now, when I was a little girl, we were so poor, my mom couldn't afford basically anything. So I think we had a few hand-me-down books, and there was one particular book that she loved and I loved, and I feel like is the most beautiful, simple Mother's Day book. It's a children's book, and it's called Love You Forever. Love You Forever is a Canadian picture book written by Robert Moonsash and published in 1986. It tells the story of the evolving relationship between a boy and his mother. And the book was written after this man and his wife, so sad, but they had 2 stillborn babies, and then they have since been on to become adoptive parents of 3. So beautiful ending. And part of the saying in Love You Forever is, a young woman holds her newborn son, these are the opening lines, and looks at him lovingly. She softly sings to him, I'll love you forever, I'll like you for always, as long as I'm living, my baby you'll be. And I love that because my mom used to say that to me and my younger brother when we were little. I mean, we were so poor, we were living in a 1-bedroom basement apartment, and I think the church paid for the rent for quite some time, and we slept in 1 bed all together, the 3 of us. And so when I read this, it makes me feel all the sentiment, all the feels of that part of our lives, which was incredibly difficult. But I love my mother for going through what she did to make our life the best it could be with the tools that she had coming from where she had. So I love, love, love that book. If you have children or grandchildren, or maybe you have nieces and nephews, this is definitely one of my favorite children's books. Love You Forever. All right, now song. Sticking with the Mother's Day theme, I love this song. It's called The Hand That Rocks the Cradle. I'm going to play you a little clip of that, and then we'll talk about the lyrics.
There ought to be a hall of fame for mamas, creation's most unique and precious pearl. And heaven help us always to that rocks the cradle, rules the world.
That is some old school country, but I love that song. I don't know why, but for some reason that was played when I was younger quite a bit, and so I remember this song. It's The Hand That Rocks the Cradle. It's written by Ted Harris and recorded by American country music artist Glenn Campbell and Steve Wariner. It was released in May 1987. So way before my time, but there's a part of me that loves country music, and I personally just have an affinity for this song. So some of the lyrics are, he got here wrinkled and scared and crying. She took him up and held him to her breast, and he was glad to get what mama offered, and then he went to sleep and put his fears to rest. I mean, that's what mamas do. It didn't seem to matter what he needed. He could always count on mama to supply, and regardless of the sleep she might be losing, he always found a twinkle in her eye. Sounds like my mom. Continuing, there ought to be a hall of fame for mamas, creation's most unique and precious pearl. Amen to that. And heaven help us always to remember the hand that rocks the cradle rules the world. She taught him all the attributes of greatness she knew that he couldn't learn away from home, and by the time she wore the cover off her Bible, her hair was gray and her little man was gone. I'm just going to stop right there. This song pays tribute to the importance of mothers, and that's what I love, because you're going to hear a lot of hip-hop songs nowadays coming out by people like Beyonce and the other trash garbage heaps of music that you hear. And maybe they're talking about motherhood, but they're not talking about what the honor and respect and beauty that mother brings, and that is teaching the lessons that you don't learn in the world except the really, really hard way. Maybe it's too late. And mothers do shape the course of the world, and so do fathers, but mothers, in a very special and unique way, shape the rest of the world. And so I think that it's important to, when we can, honor our mothers the best we can. Now, I took my mom's favorite. My mom has a few favorite movies, but I decided for this week's movie, I was going to take my mom's favorite movie, and it's The Parent Trap, the 1961 Haley Mills version. And I grew up on this movie too, and so this is all. I mean, I really might as well call this episode a tribute to my mom because this is one of her favorite movies. So we're going to play a little clip of that, and then we'll move on.
Come on now, let's compromise. You give a little, I'll give a little. Come on, let's get together. That's it.
It's probably due to my mother, but to me, this is the only version of The Parent Trap that matters. I don't like the new one that came out. It's not new anymore, but it's new compared to this one. And I love this version. It always reminds me of my mom. It's charming, it's funny, it's clean compared to today's movie. It's essentially, if you're not familiar with the story of the Parent Trap, it's two identical twins separated by birth, or separated at birth by their parents' divorce, are reunited years later at a summer camp where the scheme to bring their parents back together begins. The girls, one of whom has been living with her mother and the other with the father, switch places after camp and go to work on their plan, and the first objective is to scare off a gold digger pursuing their father. I mean, this movie is really unrealistic because there's no way that parents are going to let's get divorced. You take one child, I'll take the other. That's not how it works. You keep the kids together. So maybe, I don't know, maybe times have changed, but this movie's not realistic, but it's charming nonetheless. Now, I'm going to go ahead and skip questions because here in a couple weeks, I'm going to do a special questions episode where all I'm going to do is answer all the many questions that I can never get to. And so we're going to go ahead and end with good in the world. Now, this one is really worth celebrating, and I just want us to take a moment and pause and value where we've come. In the last 46 years, I think it's been, since Roe versus Wade, initially people felt like the battle's over, it's gone, we're never survive, we're not coming back from this, the Supreme Court has the last say. And due to the women who came before us and the men and women who came before us who decided, no, we're not going to let evil continue. We're not going to let this lay and rest. We're going to continue making a noise about this every single day until we can reverse it. We now have laws such as Georgia's law, where the governor signed the bill banning abortion after a detectable heartbeat. This is an article from Live Action. And it says, Georgia Governor Brian Kemp signed the state's heartbeat bill Tuesday morning, will outlaw abortion in Georgia when a fetal heartbeat can be detected as early as 6 weeks gestation. A lot of women have barely noticed that their period has even been missed at this point, so it effectively almost completely gets rid of abortion. And it says here, quote, Georgia is a state that values life. This is Kemp speaking. We stand up for those who are unable to speak for themselves. He said he expects the bill to be challenged, and he said that it's our job to do what is right, not what is easy. We will not back down, and we will always continue to fight for life. This is worth celebrating. This is beautiful, and it shows you that with persistence and God on your side, you and I can eventually overcome the evil that's happening in our state and happening in our country and in our world. And I just applaud those who have gone through so many years of darkness and what looked like no hope at the end of the trail and continued forward regardless to a day when we're actually almost completely banning abortion in some states and continuing to fight the good fight. And yes, this bill will be challenged. More like there's a 99.9% chance this will be challenged and taken to the courts, but that's what we have to do, because no matter whether or not we win or lose in the short term, in the long term, we know that when we go to our maker, we need to be able to face him and say, I fought the good fight. I never want to be in a position where I face my maker and say, yeah, I knew evil was happening, but I didn't do anything about it. I mean, like, you know, I can't stop all of the evil in the world. Well, maybe you can't stop all of the evil, but you can be found fighting on the right side, on God's side, on the side of good. And you know what? Here's the thing about abortion. Not every political issue is a black and white issue. There's a lot of issues where just like, I don't know what Jesus would say about this particular issue. And you kind of have to go with your gut. You struggle through trying to figure out what's best for our country, what's best for our people, what's best for the strength and unity of America. So not every issue is a black and white, clear-cut issue. But on abortion, we do have a black and white, clear-cut pattern as to what is right and what is wrong. And we know it is wrong to take the life of an innocent human being. It says in the 10 Commandments, thou shalt not murder. And this is clearly murder. And it's taking the life of another human being when God said he knew us even in our mother's womb. So I just want to take a moment for us to rejoice in this, prepare for the long battle ahead, because it is not over. Not even for Georgia, it is not over. But rejoice at where we are. Rejoice at the solidarity of the movement and its growth in the last few years, and its opposition in numbers rising. So with that, I want to just say, have a blessed weekend. God bless you. God bless America.